Good evening, this is the Oscar Expert here with Brother Bro, and it's time to talk about Knock at the Cabin. This is a new M. Night Shyamalan thriller. It's an adaptation of a book, and it's about a family who's staying at a cabin when they're approached by a group of strangers who claim that this family needs to make a sacrifice to prevent the apocalypse. We're going to get into spoilers later in the review, and we're going to tell you when we're going to say them. But for now, this is a safe place. You can stick around, but if you've already seen it and you need that hearty discussion, then we're here for you at the end. You know, I always find myself excited to see a new Shyamalan movie, even if it doesn't have like the best reviews of his filmography or anything like that. The trailers always get me curious, and I always feel like I never know exactly what I'm gonna get, and even if the experience is mixed, I'm still curious like in what ways that it's mixed, and I still expect there to be some strengths. They're also usually a pretty good early season treat. This is doing what Shyamalan does best. There's some great visual storytelling here. It's really well directed. Between this and Old, you can tell that Shyamalan is great at withholding information visually, and that he is kind of a master in terms of building tension through just camera work. And I think another strength here, along with Old, is the positioning of actors within the frame relative to one another. He makes this one location feel very dynamic, and it's always interesting how he's framing the characters, and it just adds more layers to the storytelling. There's a lot of style in his films, but it's not coming from some overbearing insistence on the film being made a certain way. It feels like it's very much servicing the story. But I also have the same problems that I have with his last film, Old, and I'll get to those problems later. I gotta say, this movie really had me hooked. I thought that it was going to exhaust itself quickly because the premise is very interesting, and a lot of times with thrillers with interesting premises, they're very engaging in like the first act or the first half, and then you kind of feel like they've already worn out the interesting part of them. But I actually felt like this movie kept me guessing and kept flipping the tables enough times where, like, you know, somebody else has the upper hand and, you know, this character is experiencing doubt here. This movie didn't even lose me once, I would say. Yeah, I thought what was really strong about this premise too is that the antagonist and the protagonist have really strong desires, and they both just are so incompatible, and we really see the strength of those tested throughout, and that's part of what it keeps it really engaging. I found myself really engaged as an audience member, wondering, you know, is this the reality of the movie, or is this the reality, or is it ambiguous? Is the movie going to leave us not knowing? And, you know, we'll talk later about the result of that, but I didn't really know until maybe the last like 20 minutes. I also found the movie to be like pretty emotionally distressing. The stakes in this film could not be higher, you know, personally and for the world at large. And so there was a lot of tension. Unfortunately, I felt like I knew where this movie was going to end up the whole time. It's too implausible that this thing would be happening, so I just believe that we're going to end up in this place. And I also kind of let go of my expectation that the movie would be trying to engage on a deeper level with the questions. I mean, we've got like choice, sacrifice, and faith kind of circulating around here, but I don't think it like lands on a truth about any of those things at all. So it was a great time while I was watching it, but in the end I was a little disappointed. Yeah, I kind of agree, though I'll extrapolate on my reasons when we get to spoilers, though they're kind of similar to what you said. I also think this movie is really strongly acted, with the main standout being Dave Bautista. Dave Bautista really made this film work for me. I mean, if you didn't have an antagonist who felt genuinely believable that they didn't want to be doing what they felt they had to do, I don't even know if this movie would have worked. But he sells that so well. I think it was crucial that the villains didn't feel villainous. I also thought Nikki Amuka Bird was really strong in this. Just as strong as Bautista, but didn't have quite as large of a character. Bautista's really a leading role. She does exactly what Bautista does really well, in that she feels like a real person who's in a situation she does not want to be in, but has to be there. And you can see how deeply she struggles with this. Rupert Grint was also great in his role. I don't want to say too much about that character. I wasn't as much of a fan of the fourth intruder. I had a problem believing that she was who we were supposed to think she was, and I just didn't really get like the kind of manic anxiety and how that was a reasonable or realistic reaction to what was going on with her. Even though that's clearly a character who's going through a lot of stress, I found the other characters felt like they were dealing with it in a more realistic way, to the point where I was like, I kind of hope she dies first. The two dads are also great in this. I found myself identifying a lot with Ben Aldridge's character, who is the more skeptical one of the two. And it was nice to have a character who felt like his reactions would have been kind of like mine, or the way that he's persuading himself that these things aren't happening, you know, felt real. And I think the movie definitely needed a character who's like, okay, this makes absolutely no sense. And overall, I felt like a lot of the characters made very smart decisions. Like, it didn't feel painful to me that characters weren't doing a certain thing.
The score is also awesome, especially in the opening credits scene. I really look forward to listening to that one. I thought there were some really nice close-ups where the characters are either looking into the lens or just directly to the side of the lens. I think those were used to great effect in drawing out more potency from the more emotional scenes.
I thought this was a great movie-going experience. I was on the edge of my seat. There were thrills, suspense. I felt emotionally engaged. I didn't come out with very much to chew on, I will say. I was a little disappointed by that, but the movie really worked for me as a whole, and I'm somewhere between a 7 and an 8 on it.
I also thought the film was really fun and nail-biting. It was a good time. I would recommend it as a nice trip to the theaters, but I really don't think there's much to chew on, and I think the film believes that there's more to it than there actually is. I would give this a 7. And now we will get into spoilers, so if you do not want it spoiled, you have to leave the room and just let your laptop run and try to do something loud.
The first thing I want to spoil is that I was disappointed in the lack of ambiguity in this film. Both the family and the intruders have very strong clashing beliefs about what needs to be done to preserve everything they love. And putting yourself in the shoes of the family mostly in this film, the question is like, would it be worth it to kill my husband and then be wrong? How would that possibility of being wrong factor in? Or maybe if you are putting yourself in the shoes of the intruders, like, how do you know for sure that your visions are true and correct? And I feel like those questions are very relevant to our world now, where a lot of people seem to believe in different realities, you know, in terms of conspiracy theories and politics or whatever. But when the movie just explains itself and says, actually, it definitely is the apocalypse, it's like, okay, well then I have nothing to do with any of that. Like the more skeptical dad in the movie, I would defend my family and think these people are crazy unless totally proven otherwise. And then he is, you know, maybe not entirely, but pretty much totally proven otherwise. But even after he makes that decision, then the movie tells us right after that there was a magical reversal of the events in the world, and so that was definitely the right decision to do. Like, even if they ended before they discover whether or not that was correct, that could have left some ambiguity. Like, was that really within my control? Like, did I really just kill my husband for nothing? And I don't even know if I would care that much about those questions, is the other thing. I almost liked that the movie scratched my itch for an answer, even though I like when movies leave things ambiguous. Like, if the movie just kind of ended on you not knowing whether or not he made the right decision, I don't know if that would have been that thought-provoking or interesting for me, because I don't know what to do with that. It would have just kind of been like a feel-bad question. So I don't know that I hated that it gave me a very clear answer, because I guess it was satisfying, but maybe the movie could have set itself up to not answer itself and leave you with more, and that would have been a movie that I think lingers.
Yeah, I think the problem is more about how it's set up, because based on the setup, it seems that there's no way that these four strangers could possibly convene in this manner with this specific and united mission unless they were possessed by such a, you know, higher or spiritual vision for how to save the world. We don't even see them struggle with what they know because there's such conviction about it.
It would have been really interesting if maybe one of the intruders started to doubt their own mission.
Yeah.
That could have made for
I
a
agree.
really
I was
interesting
going to
twist
say
too.
that. Instead of being a question of faith, which is like fundamentally faith is something that we're not going to get enough knowledge to have faith. We can't inherently gain knowledge that would make us acquire faith. But in this film, in order to have this faith, the characters must acquire the right information, and they eventually are convinced because there is just simply no other logic that could explain these series of events.
Well, one of the dads was kind of convinced by like his own vision, which was a little bit faith-based, but at that point it was also like,
it's just,
you see a plane
else.
crashing in the back and you're like, oh, so this is
There's
like,
just too much
know,
else.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. That's where like you can't really be about faith in the way that like I would experience faith, the way that I understand faith. It doesn't leave you room to contemplate.
Unlike something like Life of Pi, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good example. And then, you know, what else could this film be like truly about? Like, what's another main idea here? Well, like, I think that they were going for, you know, you always have a choice. There's this line repeated in the beginning. There's always a choice. But again, I think there's not always a choice if the choice is so pointed in one direction. If I have all this knowledge and it seems pretty complete, then like the choice I'm going to make should be pretty obvious. And on top of that, one of them is just convincing them, like, please just let me be the sacrifice. I know that I am the sacrifice. And the other guy is like, okay, well, I have all the logic to know that this is the right thing to do. So it's like the choice becomes very easy. It doesn't feel like there's a super difficult decision in this movie.
Well,
Although
I
I
don't
feel like
think
this film thinks that it has more of a dilemma and that it is going to leave you with this heavy choice about like accepting faith versus not. But really this is just like, can we piece together the puzzle or can't we? The decision is just based on whether they can piece it together logically or not.
The decision also could have been more interesting if the other guy was like, no, you should kill me. But instead it was like, no, I have a very clear idea that I'm the one who needs to die. I thought that was kind of going to be a question that was explored.
I
Like,
agree.
how do you decide, which one of these two should, be the one to die? And I also felt like that was part of the reason that they had two dads instead of like a dad and a mom, is because if you had a dad and a mom, it'd be like, well, the dad is the one who's probably going to make the sacrifice. It's kind of why I thought maybe they had it be a same-sex couple.
Oh, yeah.
And that was probably like part of the reason, but they didn't even explore like that question of like, how do you decide which one dies? But the moment at the end that at the very least I think maybe speaks to what this movie thinks it's doing, where he turns on the radio. We actually had a little bit of a debate about this. I think that when he turns on the radio at the end, they're switching it on and off, and it plays the song that was playing when they were on their way to the cabin and they were having a great time and singing along. My view of that was like, wow, is it just a coincidence that this song was on the radio? And this guy chooses to leave the song on because he needs to believe that there is something supernatural in the world that would like allow that song to be there. Like, that's not just a coincidence. It like has this greater meaning, and that's something that he needs to believe in to cope with the fact that he just killed his husband. But ultimately I don't think that the movie earns that question, because it just kind of gave us a very clear answer again of like what really happened, and what needed to be done was right. We know for a fact that it was right.
With the radio, I thought that scene was brilliant, but I was actually watching it a little bit differently, even though I agree with you now. I was watching it as he has to decide whether this is a tragedy or not. And you could see it as a tragedy if you believe that something terrible just happened, but then like he realizes that the worst thing didn't happen, so he leaves the music on to continue his life the way his husband would have wanted it. I did think the end was really interesting.
Yeah, it was a good moment. So that's about all my thoughts on why the movie is not ambiguous.
Yeah, those are my thoughts on why the movie is good, but not more than that.
Even the way that people were talking about the movie, I thought people were coming out asking, do you really think it happened? And it's like, even if people were asking that, I would like kind of shut that down. I'd be like, fucking duh, it really happened. Like, they gave you all the things you
Yeah,
needed to know.
I think you kind of wanted there to be something, and I was like, no, listen, there's not anything. And I hate to break it to you, but there's really nothing there. And you were like, I guess. If you disagree with me and you think there's something there, I'd like to hear what you think this movie is about on a deeper level. Why would someone tell this story? Are they trying to say something or trying to make a statement?
And if it's just a fun thriller, then okay. I mean, they did a good job with that.
I mean, I still gave it a 7.
Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing.
Would you believe these folks if they did this to you?